Good performance on the Joe Rogan Experience against Douglas Murray has made some waves, including people who watched our show yesterday and thought maybe we missed something. Now, we said Douglas Murray is great. He was great in this. He missed some stuff, and we're gonna go through some more of the stuff he missed. But I'm still baffled by how people find Dave Smith to be good in any way because he has an eloquent way of saying things without actually paying attention to the content, which is absolute bullshit and when you in terms of the facts and absolutely despicable in terms of the values. Um, no better topic to have the triumphant return of Mark Pellegrino to the channel. Mark has been where Douglas Murray was just a couple days ago. He has debated Dave Smith. Uh, Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Razi Ginsburg, joined by Mark Pellegrino. Mark, your thoughts on this debate, and let's start specifically with Dave's performance, and then we'll go through some clips.
Here's the thing with Dave Smith, in my opinion, almost everything he anchors his arguments on are irrelevant. And Douglas Murray sort of alluded to that, but he didn't allude to it in the deep way. He said, well, you're cherry picking facts from people who say multiple things, and you're just now picking this particular thing out because it agrees with your narrative, but none of it's relevant. It's not relevant if Netanyahu at some meeting claimed that they endorse Hamas because that's the way that they're going to prevent a two-state solution from happening. It's irrelevant what a pragmatic politician says to whatever audience he's speaking to. None of that is relevant. And Murray did say outright that almost all of the things that Dave Smith attempts to do by making the claims he makes is rob the Palestinians of their moral agency. It's like it doesn't matter if Israel allowed funds into Gaza for Douglas Murray tried to clear up the reasons for that, but it's irrelevant. The Palestinian people still chose Hamas. It was a plurality. Well, yes, it was a plurality, and then the other alternative was bad too, but they still chose Hamas. And after October 7th, by all accounts, the majority of the Palestinian people are morally behind the ends and means of Hamas. So any implication that, well, the United States does this or the blockade started this, all of it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant not only because it robs the Palestinian people of moral agency, but it's irrelevant given the types of society and the types of political establishments both sides have created. There's no moral equivalence between the government and society of Gaza and the Israeli people and the government of Israel. Zero, none. And the fact that Israel has created a parliamentary democracy where rights are a part of their founding documents, particularly the rights of religious minorities and ethnic minorities, and that those minorities have due process and that they have the capacity to appeal to the government and have won multiple times. To me, that's the argument for the existence and the legitimacy of the state of Israel over anything else. The whole history is irrelevant, given the fact of what they've created. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. By the way, I do think it's relevant that Israel gave money or allowed money to go in. It's relevant in the sense that Israel should be condemned for accepting the government that it did accept in Gaza and allow it to flourish in a sense to the point that they got to do what they did on October 7th. But that's not what he's saying. And by the way, he was quoting some advisor of Sharon who did the disengagement plan, saying this is a way to kill the peace process. It was the end of the occupation, so to speak, to use their terms. They talk about occupation. It was the end of the occupation in Gaza. Okay, so West Bank is a different story. But even that. So if you go through everything Dave Smith says in the whole thing, he will find something that some Israeli said, whether it was a year ago or 20 years ago or before the state of Israel was established, that is the reason why Israel are the bad guys and the Palestinians are the good guys. Um, and yesterday we talked about what I didn't like, an argument that Douglas Murray made that I didn't like, which is you haven't been there, therefore, your opinions don't really matter, or something to that effect. Um, but I want to go to this clip where Daniel, this is the one where he's Dave Smith is pronouncing stuff. Let's watch that clip and then let's discuss that if you have that ready. Yeah, there it is.
I think the most interesting counterfactual, well, maybe I'll give you two. Number one would be Chaim Weizmann, who was essentially supposed to be the David Ben-Gurion. Like, he was in line as like the number one ranking Zionist. This is pre the creation of the State of Israel, who urged all of the Zionist militias to not embrace terrorism. And he ended up losing that battle ultimately. In many ways, this is how terrorism was introduced.
He was the first president of the state.
David Ben-Gurion was. I was saying Chaim Weizmann. Yes. And he basically ended up losing his position to David Ben-Gurion because they just wanted to be more hardcore. And by the way, the Ergon and the Lehi and the Haganah, they openly embraced terrorism to drive out an occupying force.
Okay, my issue there, my issue with Dave is he's always lying. But my issue there is different. So first of all, just to clarify, Chaim Weizmann was the first president of Israel. Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister.
Prime minister.
But there is something
that in itself is funny that he made that major error, and I thought Douglas Murray should have attacked him a little bit harder on that.
Yeah, and he does say it as if there was some major conflict within the movement, and Weizmann was like too against being terrorists, which is why he wasn't prime minister. I don't know where he gets this, but I'm guessing he gets it from the same place where he read about the Jewish organizations fighting at the time. And clearly he read it. He didn't listen. Look, when you pronounce foreign words, you get things wrong. Douglas Murray, for some reason, thinks Hamas ends with a Z. It always sounds like he's saying Hamas. But this guy is calling the Irgun Ergon and the Lehi Lehi. I mean, are you going to take somebody seriously if they're saying, I'm a big advocate of Israel in their war against Hamas? You can at least talk about, try to understand what it is you're talking about. And clearly he read this in some blog, presumably by some either white supremacist or jihadist, and didn't really, he got the points that he memorized the points that he needed in order to repeat them in these debates.
Yeah, but what I find ironic, let me throw this by you. The libertarians and the anarchists are really big on, multiple security agencies within a given geographic area. And those were multiple security agencies, ideologically driven in slightly different ways, that were trying to protect the Israeli people. It was Ben-Gurion, from what I remember, who understood that you couldn't have these various defense groups working at cross purposes to each other. These other groups were at serious odds with the Jewish agency, and some members of those groups were arrested and tried for crimes, which you of course don't see in Gaza with respect to Hamas, and those that were in accordance with, I think, what the Jewish agency wanted to effect for the state of Israel, which is a harmonious existence with the Arabs in that region, were folded in to the Haganah, which I may be mispronouncing as well, which became the IDF. So they all consolidated into one at the behest of Ben-Gurion. He didn't fight this. Am I getting my history wrong?
So, he was against some of these organizations, but, and I think he maybe was not necessarily always in the right there, but there's also a point to be made about why these organizations chose to act as militias. Remember, much of their operations were during the time that Jews were being gassed to death in Europe. And the British were ruling Israel, what is now Israel and was then called Palestine, not a Palestinian state to our jihadist viewers. And they weren't let in. Like Jews weren't let in. Jews were turned away back to Europe. So it was absolutely right to fight, militarily against the British in Israel. It was bizarre that on the one hand the British were fighting the Nazis in Europe, and on the other hand were sending Jews back to the Nazis.
And not only that, wasn't there an Israeli corps of fighters that fought the Nazis as well in Europe? Weren't they gathered together as the Mufti was trying to gather together troops in his own way while he was in Berlin? He was trying to gather together troops to fight for the Nazis. The Israelis were the Jews were fighting on the side of the Allies, despite the fact that the British had white papered them almost out of existence. They forbade them to buy land. They were keeping the immigrants out and sending them back to Europe to be murdered. So I certainly can understand why a group of militants would believe that they have to fight for their very lives, because that was the facts. Those were the facts on the ground.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, calling them terrorists is his way of, comparing them to those people who rape, torture, mutilate, starve people in tunnels, smash babies' heads in, and none of this was done by those organizations. Okay, they were going after British,
Military targets. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Jonathan, for another super chat, and thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Let's go to the next clip. I do have to mention, I don't think this has been mentioned yet, but I have to mention that Dave Smith is a Jew, in case you haven't known. He does like to remind us, because, of course, if you disagree with him, then how dare you? He's a Jew, so he can say whatever he wants. That point has been made. Now, let's go to the next clip.
Having some humility in these complex situations. But I would also say, like, do you not then at any point, as you're like a very well-known public figure who's supporting this war, think about the level of human suffering that is being inflicted on these innocent people and go like, man, is there another way? Maybe I'm getting this wrong. Maybe this is the Iraq war all over again, which you also supported, that like maybe that was a big mistake.
If I say, I don't need to think about it. I've seen it.
Okay,
I
fine.
know
Okay.
it. I describe it in my book.
Okay.
I describe.
All right, let's pause here. This is an unfortunate moment for Douglas Murray, I think. First of all, the maybe you're wrong. I highly recommend Leonard Peikoff's essay, Maybe You're Wrong. But this is such an easy question to fend off, and to say I don't need to think, I've seen it, goes back to the point that I think Douglas failed on earlier on when he does say, look, you haven't been there, then your opinion doesn't count, or those were not his words, but something to that effect. And of course you have to think. And Douglas, you are thinking. It's not that you are staying at the perceptual level of I've seen things and I don't need to think about them. You are thinking, and that's I mentioned this yesterday. The what Douglas misses the most is the fact that he discusses and argues the facts as if this is not a conflict of values, and that is the fundamental difference here. So, and Douglas does that, what he sees, when he tells us, I don't need to think, I see, he does process that information and then evaluate it based on his values, as does Dave Smith. So I think that was an unfortunate moment. Mark.
Well, there is a better way to do it. It's just that the better way to do it is not going to make Dave Smith happy. It's not going to make people who try to sanitize war happy. People have forgotten that war is the absence of civility. War is the absence of civilization. What Hamas and the Palestinian people did on October 7th was say all the elements of that make a society civil, rights being one, individual rights, persuasion, democratic process, negotiation, all of these things are aspects of civilization that we now decide do not matter. We are going to get what we want by murder and mayhem. Well, okay, now you have thrown aside the laws of men and embraced the laws of the jungle. And that is something that Dave Smith can't understand. That the sole object of the IDF should be the protection and defense of Israeli citizens, and that Palestinians matter less than Israeli citizens is something he can't wrap his mind around. And so if you're taking that ethic as a sincere guide, then you would use a lot more force and do a more overwhelming force in order to impress upon whatever Palestinians remained in that region that their ideology leads to death and destruction and nothing else. There is no possible way you can hope to be successful in your cause because I will use such overwhelming force against you. I am not. Now, Michael and I had an argument about this because he thinks that civilized countries and semi-free states have a bit of an obligation to avoid civilian casualties. In this particular case, I mean, he has a bit of a point. We don't want to kill civilian casualties, but that is sort of what happens in war. It's a terrible side effect of war, and of course, the responsibility for that is on the aggressors. It's not on the defenders. But certainly one of the errors that Israel is making is treating the Palestinian population as if they are the moral equals of, or of equal value in a sense, by shifting them around and moving them around and trying to keep as many alive as possible. I mean, none of that matters to anybody who's against Israel. None of it. None of their attempts at sacrificing themselves for the sake of saving Palestinians matters to a single person out there who is anti-Israel. They're still calling it genocide and ethnocide, despite all of the sacrifices that the Israeli people are making. I mean, they don't understand that going house to house and taking out these booby traps and are fighting Hamas fighters puts Israeli citizens at incredible risk that they don't have to be in because of their technological and military advantages. Not a single Israeli has to really die in this incursion, but they've put themselves at great risk in order to save Palestinians' lives. They've put their entire economy at great risk since everybody's a reservist and everybody has to be mustered up for service. Fighting a war for what is it now? Almost 2 years that could have been done in a month and a half if they had vigorously attacked Hamas with the intent to destroy Hamas and demoralize the Palestinian population. Sorry, that's an aspect of war. It's an unpleasant aspect of war. But if you have any self-esteem and if self-defense really matters to you, then ending the threat is your responsibility.
So I've also had that disagreement with Michael Leibowitz, but I also have this disagreement with you on civilian casualties, especially in this war right now in Gaza. I think the suffering of the population should be a goal of the war while it is going on. And the reason for that is because the Palestinians, the best among them may have just done nothing and seen this go on and done nothing to stop it. And they need to get to a point where they fear Israel more than they fear Hamas so that they don't allow things like this to be done in their name. Remember, hostages were and presumably still are being held by civilians. In some cases, they are the apartments of the civilians are like museums. People come and see the Jew hostages. This is Palestinian culture, and destroying, the war can end in a sense, in the immediate sense, by destroying Hamas's military capabilities, which, by the way, Douglas Murray doesn't think can be done, and it shows that he also thinks that at some point avoiding civilian casualties is more important than achieving the goals.
Of course it can be done. Of course it can be done. It's just going to be unpleasant and ugly. And the fact that it's unpleasant and ugly isn't the fault of Israel. It's Hamas and the Palestinian people, because they could end this tomorrow. They can end it tomorrow. Now, we keep saying that it's almost a cliche. All they have to do is surrender. People don't understand what surrender means. Surrender means you are now embracing civil society. And until they surrender, they're not embracing civil society. I don't care about performative protests against Hamas in the streets. I don't know if they're performative or genuine, or maybe they are. No, to me, you're fighting for the side of right when you rebel against Hamas. You take a fucking stone and you smash them over the face if that's all you have. You still outnumber them in population if you are indeed an innocent population, and you fight to get those hostages back to Israel, and you fight Hamas. You start an internal rebellion. You may die doing it, but it's a sad fact. You said the best of them, have just not done anything. Well, I think the best of them have protested and been thrown off buildings and murdered, but they're few and far between. They're because most people are, as Rand said, those types of authoritarian societies are composed of three types of people, right? Active collaborators, passive collaborators, and rebels. And the rebels are simply frothing at the bit for Israel to win. And the other parts of the population, as collaborators to me, are morally culpable for everything that's going on, not the Israelis.
So I haven't seen the people who say that they want Israel to win. What I have seen is the protests recently, but that took a year and a half. And the protests are basically, this is inconvenient for us. We'd like it to stop. Not this is evil. We need to completely change the culture. So as far as I'm concerned, those protests are too little, too late. But yeah, it's better than nothing in terms of.
So where do we differ? I don't think we differ. I mean, I'm as hardline as you on this. I mean, and it's a difficult case to make to people because we have delicate sensibilities living in civilization. We don't think this kind of violence is warranted or necessary. Of course, we don't understand the mentality of a jihadist nationalist fanatic who will stop it, who thinks it's a virtue to murder. I mean, we're looking at an entirely different creature than, calling them savages and animals is not far off, to be honest with you, because they've rejected what makes us human.
It's
And
not far
I have
off. It's spot on.
it's spot on. So me and you are extremists. We're considered extremists, and I'm still laboring to find where we differ on this. But maybe you'll enlighten me later.
Well, I'd put it this way. If the Palestinians haven't surrendered and released the hostages, life in Gaza is still too good, and Israel needs to consider changing that. Torah Worldwide,
This is an inconvenient truth. Yes, I agree with you.
Torah Worldwide says, guys, don't take his words literally. He got cornered with shady tactics. First of all, yeah, in extemporaneous speaking, uh, not every word is necessarily what you would use if you were writing this as an essay that you have a couple of years to write. But it was across the board arguments that Douglas Murray operates, within the Overton window. I mean, he's on the edge of it, but he is still within that. And within that, I think he and Barry Weiss are probably the two best defenders of Israel. We operate outside the Overton window, and I think outside the Overton window or all around, we are the best. But yeah, Mark, you've experienced the shady tactics of Dave Smith.
I have, and they are shady. Because if you say, for example, if I were to say to him, which I did try to say actually in our debate, when he was trying to stand up for, standing up for the suffering of the people, the Palestinian people, and I said, oh, that's sort of irrelevant. I mean, they've brought this upon themselves. He would, just go on, and then carry on with, magnify that point, which needs to be unpacked deeply for anybody who's listening, because it's because what he's assuming is that I don't understand that it's a horrible thing. But he doesn't understand is that I feel for the Israeli people, for the IDF, because these guys and gals are forced into these scenarios where they're going to experience absolute horror, and then they have to come home because they don't hold horror as a value; they hold liberty and life as a value. They're going to have to come home and live with this, what the Hamas has made them have to do to live. And it's going to be extremely taxing on them psychologically. There's going to be lots of psychological issues going on after this war, and especially because of the moral unclarity and the convoluted moral thinking around the world. They're going to have to battle with that within themselves. So they have a lot to deal with, and it's their psychologies that I'm more concerned with, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and Douglas Murray did touch on this, and of course, I think he did it too softly, and Dave Smith, of course, went crazy over this. That the victims. The way I put it is the real victims among the people who are now in Gaza are the hostages and Israeli soldiers. Yes, those young people who are in there. Again, remember, they are in there for the most part in order to prevent civilian casualties on the enemy's side, because most of what they do, if done from the air, would be done more effectively and with virtually zero risk. The plane malfunctioning is the worst risk that soldiers would be in if they did it from the air.
Well, but I also think that two things can be right sort of simultaneously, which is I can feel for children who have no moral agency yet, who are caught in the crossfire of this terrible, terrible conflict, and at the same time know that it's not the Israeli Defense Forces' fault, or is Israel in general, or the Israeli state's fault. I can still know that it's their parents, it's the Palestinian culture, it's Hamas, it's all that toxic ideology that is putting their children in harm's way. I know where to put the blame, and I can still feel sympathy and compassion for these children who are being exploited by the Palestinian PR machine. Let's face it, they're exploiting the deaths of these kids, sometimes lying outright about it in order to magnify the fact, the death and destruction, in order to shame Israel into and degrade them morally. I mean, that campaigning in itself is a sort of psychological torture for everybody involved. Yeah, for us that witnesses it, when they put this on social media and make claims about it, it's a kind of psychological torture. And they've been using this against the hostages and the hostages' families. I mean, the way they tortured the families of the hostages is simply sadistic. And I wish Israel would be as I can't think of another word, but as shameless about publicizing the acts of Hamas as Hamas is about magnifying the casualties in their midst. Because if they did that, they would win an ideological and moral war that's happening right now. I mean, that's why so much of the world seems to be against Israel, is because the Palestinians have a lock on the moral argument, and they keep pressing that moral argument to the world, and they're doing it in the form of pictures, of course, because that's distressing and anti-conceptual, and it hits people right in the gut, and it's immediate. And I think the Israelis need to do the same.
I don't know if that would work. Remember, on October 7th, they were live streaming themselves, and people were taking to the streets as this was happening
That's true.
to support the Palestinians.
That's
So
true.
yeah, this is a battle of values, and it is a battle between civilized people and savages. And yes, those of you in the West, I see many of you in the chat right now who support the Palestinians. If you support savages, you are savages. Let's go to the next clip.
This has been acknowledged at the highest levels of Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence. That there's just no way to get rid of Hamas without it being replaced by more Hamas or Hamas-like group, because it's the basic understanding of this whole situation, right? It's General McChrystal's insurgent math. There's still Hamas people. Hamas are popping back up in the areas that Israel's already leveled, and the more innocent people you kill, the more radicalized you're going to get this population, the more these people are going to hate you and join up with the resistance movement. And so I just think that to use the justification that we're trying to get rid of Hamas, and therefore it's not like, it doesn't matter how many innocent women and children die in the process.
Of course it
Or,
matters.
All right,
there's no responsibility.
I don't know if we should
My
listen
God.
to some of Douglas's reply there, but this argument is complete bullshit, and we have every single step of Israel's approach to the Palestinians in the last few decades as proof. Every move that Israel does towards peace results in more death and suffering for Israelis. Every military action that Israel does diminishes that, and the stronger that military action, the more it diminishes it. There is no way that Hamas or anybody in Gaza can now carry out from there an October 7th style attack. They can still do it from the West Bank because not enough has been done there. But there's also that if we are going to go back to those protests, and again, they're living conditions protests, I would call them, but they're still not something you would have seen before. So Even within the parameters of let's have a hostage deal, which of course we on this channel have objected to, continuously and still are objecting to. But when there were such deals, look at the deals that were made when Israel stepped up military pressure. Look at the ones that were done with zero military pressure. Look at the first deal in November 2023, where it was three terrorists for one hostage. And look at the Gilad Shalit deal, where there was no military pressure, there was one soldier, and there were over 1,000 terrorists, including Yahya Sinwar, who then masterminded October 7th. So this is a complete inversion of what actually happens. No, if the population sees that their way of life leads to them suffering and having nothing else in their life but suffering, they might reconsider it or they might not, and then they can continue suffering.
Yeah, I mean, this is argument from authority and context dropping in the extreme. I mean, he quotes a pragmatist military figure, who probably operating from a particular theoretical standpoint with respect to the way wars are fought, which today is to not win, to not defeat and vanquish the enemy, and from that context, which is entirely dropped, the context that, well, you fight an enemy to cease fire, you fight them carefully, you do not demoralize them. Well, of course you're going to attract more people to the movement because you haven't demoralized them. You've in fact given them some hope, especially the religious fanatics, that, well, maybe God is on their side because they're not, they're not being wiped out. They continue to exist. So to me, it's an irrelevant argument. We have historical precedent that goes beyond Israel with respect to vanquishing the enemy totally, and that leading to absolute peace. Now, in World War II, we fought two fanatical enemies: Japanese chauvinism and imperialism on the one hand, fanatically driven by Shintoism in Japan, and Nazism in Germany. Both we defeated overwhelmingly. We overwhelmed the population with force on both fronts. And the result was an unconditional surrender, which is the only proper surrender that there is, because the enemy has no right to make conditions. They have to surrender completely to the defenders and say, now I embrace civilization. This is precisely what Germany and Japan did. I don't see people being recruited as kamikazes for Japan to attack San Diego. I don't see people being recruited as Nazis to carry on the war with the rest of Europe or America. The reason was because we defeated them completely. The defeating them completely means we vanquished their ideology, not only into the eyes of the world, but to themselves. So they understood that that ideology would no longer be successful for them. And that's never happened in the Muslim Islamicist world. We've fought them to standstills or to ceasefires, and that's happened dozens of times in Israel. When we see they're in a state of more or less perpetual war, and because they have a ceasefire, they're never completely demoralized, never. So they think that their cause has hope. So of course it's going to attract people if they think it has hope, which is basically what you said. But I tried to expand the sphere.
Somebody in the chat says 10,000 in Israeli jails. Yeah, that's terrible. I mean, you key a Tesla, you go to jail. If you're a terrorist at war, yeah, get information out of them and then execute them and then free up that space for the next terrorist. Let's watch the next clip.
Wow.
Hey, before the next clip, Mark, do you wanna reply so that you're not associated with and it doesn't sound
Well,
like
certainly all of those people who are in jail, even though the ones who are 15, the young kids, that's probably what they're pointing to. I mean, these people have engaged in terrorist acts. I mean, 15-year-old kids have carried, pipe bombs and suicide vests across checkpoints, and they have been involved in murdering and throwing stones at people, and they're not innocent if they're caught. And I'm not saying that being caught and being in jail is of itself proof that they're terrorists, but there's certainly a high probability that they are, and not entirely innocent. And look, in one of these prisoner exchanges, Yahya Sinwar was one of the people who was released, a guy who made his bones murdering Palestinian people and torturing them, macheteing them to death. Of course, they were collaborators, and then helped plan October 7th. So I'm not sympathetic to the numbers thing. Yeah, there's 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli prison. Well, don't fuck with the IDF.
Yeah, yeah, and people from the pro-Palestinian side bring this up as, oh, what about the hostages? What about the 10,000? Well, it's not the same. It's not going to a concert is not the same as going to murder people in a concert.
Correct.
Now let's play the next clip.
Like, if the Palestinians had done this different, then maybe things would have worked out different. But I just think, again, when you look at things, when you say, which essentially I think is your point here, right? Which, I mean, I tried to push you on this, but you're saying, look, we can degrade Hamas, but the cost of that is going to be slaughtering a whole bunch of people.
Not slaughtering, it's war.
Thank you.
I think you're okay. They're not being slaughtered. They're being killed. Okay, whatever
They're
word
being
you want to
killed
use.
in a brutal war started by Hamas. Yes.
Yes, it's babies and little kids screaming out for help under rubble, and no help is coming. They sit there under the rubble until they die. That is the level of human suffering that's being inflicted. And if you want to say, well, listen, that's a price that I'm willing to pay to try to degrade Hamas, even though you yourself recognize that we can't totally eliminate them, but we could maybe degrade them or maybe take them down a peg. No. And the price for that is these babies being tortured to death.
All right. We know from these people that the entire population of Gaza are babies, but what is the price to pay for getting rid of Hamas? That is on the Palestinians. They determined the price. They started the war. They can say the price is 0 more deaths because we are going to take Hamas and hand them over to Israel, and we're going to release the hostages. So the price is on the Palestinians again every time, and this should be when this is a commentary channel, that is a commentary channel. It's different, but in news reports, I really would like to see every single report about this war start with the war that Hamas launched, and the Palestinian people launched against Israel on October 7th, and that they still refuse to end, even though there is an standing offer on the table of surrender and release the hostages, and it's over. The Palestinians continue to want this war to happen, and they've said, we'll keep doing this again and again until there are no more Jews left to kill. They've said, we're happy to make this sacrifice. Their representatives in the West tell us a different story, but people in Gaza don't really seem to mind dead Gazan children.
Yeah, I mean, that seems self-evident to me, and certainly something that Douglas Murray could have hit a lot harder. That the price, it's not about what price we're willing to pay. It's the price that the Palestinian people are willing to pay. Stop taking the moral agency out of their hands and placing it in everybody else's hands. They're allowing this war to continue. It's within their power to surrender right now. There could be 0 more casualties. As you said, they refuse. But also the implication on Dave's part that the alternative, he's offering a better alternative with some sort of ceasefire, which we've seen through the past 70 years or longer, has kept Israel in a state of perpetual war. We've just seen that they've been in a state of perpetual war with every ceasefire. So the alternative is that the Israelis are supposed to tolerate a certain amount of violence upon their society every day, every year, whenever these savages decide to attack and murder Israelis. They should just put up with it as a cost of being in the region. No, that's not what Israel has to do. It's a false alternative. And as you said, the war continuing is because the Palestinian people want it to continue. Plain and simple.
Yep. Next clip. Do we have another clip, Daniel? If so, yes, let's watch it.
definition intentional. And you could sit here and talk about, and it is true, there have been documented cases of Hamas placing missiles in mosques and in schools and things like that. But when you look at the aerial footage of Gaza, that does not describe every single strike that Israel has launched. There have been tons of bombs dropped where it's simply, and we have very good reporting on this, where they've literally just have information that they believe with some degree of certainty that a couple of Hamas militants are in this building, and so they blow up the building. That is intentionally murdering innocent people. And if you're going to advocate for this war, I don't see how you can do it without saying that, like, at least bite the bullet that Madeleine Albright did when she was asked.
Okay. We don't need the whole backstory and the examples that he gives. We get it. Yeah, on October 7th, there was some information that maybe something is happening, and Israel didn't act on it in some senses. Even when they saw, people going through the fence, when they weren't armed, they didn't shoot because, we're not certain. Yeah, Israel should learn the lesson of October 7th. And if you think there are terrorists somewhere, shoot first. It's very
Which they
interesting,
don't do, but they don't do that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you make a great point.
Doing that.
Right. Yes, that's what he's doing. It's everything he's saying is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. All he's doing is making a dramatic case and trying to appeal to emotions, as opposed to which is your point, which is, well, yeah, Israel, every time they've ignored intelligence, they pay for it big time. Every time they ignore intelligence, they pay for it, and they don't shoot first. They drop leaflets, they hit cell phones, they tell people to leave the building before they bomb it. I mean, they don't try to kill innocent civilians. They try to kill Hamas. And how you do that by warning Hamas in advance that you're actually going to bomb the building that they're in is the fact that any of the Hamas militants and leaders are killed in this manner is surprising to me. Unless, you know what I'm saying? Who warns the enemy that you're coming? Who gives them a strategic advantage except somebody suffering from a self-esteem issue? I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense.
And, it's interesting. He started that clip we just saw saying, yes, there have been hospitals and schools where they were hiding munitions, where terrorists were hiding, but that doesn't explain the whole leveling of Gaza. Do you remember in the last year and a half the multiple times that Dave Smith tweeted, actually, this hospital was justifiably bombed, or this school was because there were munitions and terrorists in there? It's interesting that, when you talk about the war as a whole, a year and a half into it, you can make these general points, but maybe I missed it. Mark, you were more active on Twitter and more actively engaged with Dave Smith.
He's never done that. He never will do that because he's making a living at continuing this narrative. And now his ego is all caught up in the narrative as well. So there's really no way he's going to back off. But for people who didn't see the discussion, I want to say that Douglas Murray made an outstanding point here. It's a concrete fact. Because, of course, these pro-Palestinian folks love to post pictures of a decimated Gaza. Well, Douglas Murray, who's been there, by the way, noted the fact that every second or third house had a tunnel entrance. Every second or third house was booby-trapped. Every second or third house had munitions in it. Sometimes under cribs, you'd find these rocket launchers and grenade launchers. It's like... So the vast devastation there, when you think about 300 plus miles of underground tunnels in an area, a fraction of the size of Manhattan, to have more underground tunnels than Manhattan. I mean, this is a entire state fitted out for war. The entire infrastructure that sits underneath Gaza, these tunnels that are meant to transport militiamen and weapons and hostages, it exists under the entirety of Gaza. There's probably not a square inch of it that isn't in some way that couldn't be a legitimate target. So I thought Douglas Murray did a great point at pointing that out, because people don't understand how militarized the whole society actually is. To have a tunnel entrance in every second or third house, that says something about where the civilian mindset is and what kind of values they hold.
Yeah, and the munitions at every second or third house, uh, from what I've heard from soldiers who have been in Gaza during the past year and a half, that's generous. It's pretty much every house, and that's why you see Gazans walking around unarmed, and that doesn't mean they're not terrorists. They're unarmed because they know if you're walking around with a gun, the IDF can see you wherever you are, out on the street. If you're not in a tunnel, you can be seen. So they walk around without guns. Yeah, we're out of clips, but there is a comment in the chat. Soon you will have a new home to the White House camp out there. I don't speak any language in which that sentence makes sense, but I was actually gonna use this to ask you, the three people on this, we didn't mention Joe Rogan, I think, by name at all, and I think that's probably says something about this interview, but all three of them are Trump supporters, and if you look at the current political landscape, you really have to wonder, like the Democrats, the Republicans, those are the options. Mark, are those the options? Are people basically stuck with Trump or Harris or whoever follows each or both? Yeah.
You're not stuck with those two options. You're not even stuck with libertarians. There's now a party that is online that you can donate to, that you can become a member of. We're actually getting somebody on the ballot in Alabama in August. It is the American Capitalist Party. Go visit the site, americancapitalistparty.org, and let's be the change. Let's stop the duopoly, the statism, the nonsense on one side, and the nihilism on the other. There is a party that is principled, ethical, and based in consistent application of individual rights, and it's the American Capitalist Party. Go visit it. And if the American Capitalist Party were in power now, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Yeah, the link is in the chat and will be in the description as well. Hopefully we've spoken about this debate enough, but who knows? Yeah, we will be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective. The Daily Objective and the reality show are back on Monday. Thanks, Mark, for joining me. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.